what is Bitcoin? This is to you guys, is it a currency, a competitor to the dollar? Is it a payment system for micropayments or transactions, remittances? Is it a store of value? Where do you see use?
Yeah.
All the above. All right, Barry, please start it off.
You just described it.
That's right. Yeah.
Well, currency. Do you actually see it as a currency, as a competitor to the dollar?
Well, I mean, it is a currency. It doesn't have to compete with the dollar to actually be used as a currency. I'm not of the belief it's going to replace the dollar. I think it'll serve, a purpose within everybody's wallet, and I think you can still have the dollar as the reserve currency and still have a successful Bitcoin phenomenon.
Do all of you agree with that assessment? Jeremy, I'm going to pick on you. You seem shy. You seem shy at the moment.
No, I think the important thing to understand about Bitcoin is that it's at its heart, it's a technology, it's a protocol. In the same way that HTTP is the protocol that underlies the web, or SMTP is the protocol that underlies email. And one of the applications, and the first application for Bitcoin, is as a currency. But there are a whole bunch of other applications that will start to develop from that, and that leads to all the other things that you suggested. And on top of that, the other important thing is smart contracts, which is the other opportunity that Bitcoin provides for, which allows you to program money in the same way that, for instance, voice over IP allows you to program telephony. So it's easiest to think about this stuff in analogies rather than to try to dive down deep into the technology details, at least for my little brain. And the way I think about it is that once upon a time, if you wanted to take a phone call from somebody, you had to be at a certain point, which was within 5 feet of your phone, that was in a physical place in your office or in your home, at a certain time. And if you missed the call, then there was no easy way to kind of capture that. And over time, with mobile and with voice over IP, we started to see this whole proliferation of things that people couldn't imagine when they were dialing rotary phones, with the spiral cords that were attached to the walls. And it allows you to have calls follow you. It allows you to have, voicemail digitally delivered. It allows you to have transcription of voicemail. It allows a whole bunch of different applications that you couldn't even imagine. And that's the same analogy for Bitcoin to money today.
So let me just dig into that a little bit further and ask you folks that haven't participated to jump in. But so let's talk about adoption. Let's look down the road a year or two. I mean, what sort of adoption do we expect? Is it rivaling the Discover card? Is it people are replacing Visa uses with it? Where is it in 2 years?
Well, I think one of the good things about Bitcoin is that it opens up a discussion, but to me there are a lot more interesting protocols and digital currencies out there. Jeremy mentioned smart contracts, and with Ripple, which is another protocol and way to send money and change currencies, you're going to be able to do that with it. And there's another one coming out, Ethereum, which people are really excited about in the digital community space. But whether or not Bitcoin's going to be replacing all these things, it's not that super interesting to me, because I think there are a lot of other ways to send money through these other digital currency protocol platforms that really can disrupt the world and finance.
Brian, you were an early investor. How do you see Bitcoin playing out in the next couple of years? Where will we see the greatest use and adoption?
I wish I knew the answer to that question completely. I think it's too soon to tell, but I think we'll see continued adoption across the board. I do think the price will rise.
I think we should just make this a little bit more concrete. I think, best case estimates is there's probably 5 million Bitcoin wallets in the world right now. I think that's about right. No more than that.
Maybe a million with Coinbase.
Probably a million with Coinbase, 1.3 million with blockchain.
Yep.
Maybe a couple million downloaded wallets. I would say that the vast majority of those wallets are empty. Well, maybe the majority of those wallets are empty, and many of those wallets are duplicate, and you're probably looking at order of magnitude 1 to 1.5 million people who actually hold Bitcoin in the world. What do you think, Barry? About right?
Yeah, there was a study that came out which represents 0.02% of the world's population.
Right.
So we have a long way to go. But it will. I think we'll see growth accelerate. But unlike, I think the parallels to the internet are correct from a platform perspective. we have within the Bitcoin community, there's a regulatory overhang that the internet did not have that needs to be worked through over the next, probably decade. But I don't think that's going to be a limiting factor to the overall adoption at the end of the day. Just the rate of growth and acceptance throughout the world.
I mean, the big story this year, or the past 12 months, is the merchant adoption starting to grow exponentially. And so I'm an investor in a company called Coinbase, one called BitPay, which are the two largest merchant processors here in the U.S. And so I have complete visibility into their pipelines, who they're speaking to, who they're implementing. And it really is, it's the who's who of online and offline merchants. And the reason why I think we're seeing this dramatic uptick in adoption from a merchant perspective is because the question is now no longer why accept Bitcoin. The question is now becoming why not accept Bitcoin. And the reason why it is now that question is because companies like Coinbase and BitPay are now providing basically guarantees on the conversion rate in and out of Bitcoin. So when Overstock started accepting Bitcoin using Coinbase, if someone buys something on the site for $100, Overstock is guaranteed to get $100. And so from Overstock's perspective, they're opening themselves up to a whole new group of customers. They're saving 1, 2, 3% on the payment cost relative to credit cards. They don't take any currency risk. And as far as they're concerned, that's all upside, and there really is no downside. And so I think more and more merchants are seeing the positives of Bitcoin, and if they can guarantee the exchange rate, there really is no reason not to accept Bitcoin.
I think that's right, at the broad brush, but I think it's also important to sort of, I think, BitPay is the leader, right, in payment processing today, and they're at 130 million, I think, last year, roughly.
Yeah.
I think that's the number that they announced, and when you put that in the context of credit card transactions, it's not big. I think that all of the reasons that you laid out for people to adopt and use Bitcoin for transactions are right, and I do think that in the long term, that is going to be the driver, and that long term probably is measured in decades rather than months.
So let's in a slightly different direction. Let's talk about where you guys see the investment opportunities today. Obviously, most of the investing we've seen so far from a venture perspective has been infrastructure oriented. I understand that we're starting to see some clever entrepreneurs evolve into application companies. And again, Brian, I'm going to pick on you because you've been watching this for a while. Not that the other panelists have not, but tell me, when you think about investing, you've had an arm's length approach for a little while. What are you looking for?
Yeah, we've made one investment, a company called CoinCenter, a trading platform business here in New York, which did with Barry, and we've looked at a lot of businesses, and we've, just taking a step back as an early stage venture capitalist, our job is to back disruptive innovation, and I don't think in fintech there is anything more disruptive or innovative than Bitcoin. So it would be irresponsible for me not to be spending a good amount of time meeting with companies and trying to understand the sector more and looking to make investments. And so where I sit today is there's a broad set of opportunities, but I'm very interested in the payments area. To me, international remittance, I made a failed remittance business, remittance bet back in 2006 that got into some regulatory issues. But I think Bitcoin's in a better position to really take a bite of that market, and those are huge dollars that are being spent. And the idea of spending, charging $5 to send $50 to someone in Mexico is obscene, and driving that cost down to near zero, I think, is going to be a reality, and I think Bitcoin will power that.
I totally agree with you, but I think the time frame for that happening is pretty long.
Well, in America, I was just traveling around the world on Bitcoin and meeting other Bitcoin enthusiasts in other countries, and the regulations are definitely not as strict. And in terms of remittance stuff, there are definitely some companies that will probably be able to do things like that, not in America to start. And not to keep harping about Ripple, but I think Ripple would probably be a better use case for sending money. But kiosks accepting cash and then being able to buy Bitcoin or other digital currencies, that's something really interesting. And also social KYC, know your customer, being able to integrate different components to help verify and know who people are when you're dealing with cryptocurrency and in the cryptocurrency space.
Mark, it sounded like your question was, where are the investment opportunities? Is that, okay, so I mean, you should think about it in this way. There are no public companies to invest in. There are no public ETFs yet. We are moving our vehicle to the public market, but that's not going to happen until Q4. And then you have companies. And so companies, at this stage, it's generation 2 of the basic infrastructure companies. And so it's wallets, it's merchant processors, it's exchanges. There's a lot of fantastic ideas for businesses, but I think a lot of them are probably a little too early. But I think the big change over the past 12, 18 months is the kind of the quality of the entrepreneur and really the quality of the investors. I mean, Jeremy and Brian are incredibly successful investors that really, Jeremy, your first Bitcoin investment was how long ago?
About a year.
Yeah, and so, in the course of a year, you've seen investors like Jeremy and Excel and Benchmark and Google Ventures and Andreessen Horowitz all starting to invest in what is a fairly kind of small group of fundable entrepreneurs. But what's amazing, and as all of you kind of dig into this whole Bitcoin digital currency phenomena, is there's thousands of companies being created and launched right now, many of which are being started by successful serial entrepreneurs. And so the opportunities will present themselves, but for people who are investing in the public market, you're going to have to wait a while.
I think that there's a real timing question, like you said. We're still building the infrastructure. With order of magnitude 1 million people using Bitcoin in the world, you don't have enough of a user base to build product applications on top of it. That will come, as the adoption grows, but we got to get the fundamental. It's too hard to buy Bitcoin, hold Bitcoin, and spend Bitcoin today. Those fundamental problems are being solved by these infrastructure companies. A lot of the ones that Barry talked about. But those problems aren't solved yet, and they will be solved over the course of the next few years. And once those problems are solved, then you can start thinking about some of these vertical applications that can get built. And I think, a good candidate for that is remittance. Right. I mean, the fundamental problem with remittance today is, you take Mexico, you want to send Bitcoin, you want to send money to Mexico through Bitcoin or through Ripple. It's easy to it's easy to convert dollars to Bitcoin. It's easy to send Bitcoin from the US to Mexico. What's hard is to convert Bitcoin at scale into pesos, because you need a local market for Bitcoin denominated in pesos, and that doesn't exist at scale in Mexico today, nor in India, nor in the Philippines, nor in any of the major remittance corridors. The only one that does offer an opportunity at scale today is China, because there is a big domestic market there. Argentina, there's a big domestic market. That's not a big remittance corridor, but I think it's an area you could build a business in. But we're early in a lot of this stuff, and I think it's years before we get the sort of scale that we need to be able to build these sort of specific applications that solve problems. And I'm hugely bullish on that, because my time horizon for investing is, years to decades, and so I'm okay with that.
Yep.
But I just want to make sure that we don't think that this is all happening tomorrow.
And I think also one of the things that makes international remittance particularly fascinating is exactly what Jeremy was saying. It's a quarter by quarter business. So each quarter becomes an interesting petri dish or test bed for Bitcoin to work. So it's not going to international remittance and say, let's just be able to remit, country to country throughout the world. But taking these smaller quarters to start and perfecting the process and building out from there is likely going to be how you see adoption over time.
Now, one thing I totally agree with Margot on is that the opportunity internationally is dramatically different than in the U.S. Because in the U.S., we have two fundamental things that make it hard for Bitcoin to get mass market adoption early. The first is that our payment system isn't broken. 3% is not a huge amount of money to pay for payments. And you know what? Almost everybody has credit cards or other forms of electronic payment. And the second thing is that the US dollar is stable, and most Americans actually have high trust in the US dollar as a store of value. So the two core uses of Bitcoin, one is a store of value, and the other one is payments. The alternatives are just too good in the US. But you go internationally, and that is not true anymore.
So let me jump in, and sorry for cutting you off,
Do
Jeremy.
you guys want me to talk more about this, or I'm happy to go.
This panel is like Bitcoin, right? It's distributed.
You guys want me to keep going?
Decentralized. Decentralized.
Well, we can move on. I'm easy.
Anarchy.
All right. So, you go to India, and 35%. Sorry, let me get my numbers right. 60% of e-commerce transactions in India are cash on delivery. You think about that for a second. So you buy something online, and a guy in a motorbike or a moped or a bicycle puts that package in his basket. He bikes to your door, and he hands you the package, and you decide whether or not you're going to pay him or not. And you decide not to pay him because, you know, your circumstances have changed or you just don't want to do it. The return rates are really high, and the cost of returns is really high for e-commerce when you've got a largely cash-on-delivery payment mechanism. The same thing is true in China. It's 35% of payments for e-commerce and m-commerce are cash-on-delivery. I don't know the number for Russia, but I think it's comparable. That is fundamentally bad for any sort of remote commerce. And so, you know, why is that? It's because most people don't have credit cards in these countries, right? And so we've conflated this problem with credit and, you know, electronic payments into credit cards, right? And so the question is, can the developing world leapfrog over credit cards into digital currency, with Bitcoin being the best candidate for that, but certainly Ripple and other ones are possibilities as well. The same way that they leapfrogged over fixed line wireless, fixed line telephony into wireless telephony. Is that a possibility? Like, do you think that there is a 1% chance that might happen? 5%? 10%? 15%? It's clearly not zero, right? There's a need for the technology that is being satisfied because everybody believes that e-commerce and m-commerce is going to go up over time, and that, you know, in the developing world where you do not have well-functioning retail markets, that will be even more pronounced. And we're seeing it in real time. And we see this real problem that's being experienced by massive at-scale companies, which, you know, in China, you know, I mean, we're talking about $100 billion market cap companies that are going to be coming to market soon. So yeah, this is a real problem experienced by real companies who can put the resource against it. So that's issue number one. Issue number two is that that's how Bitcoin or Ripple or something else becomes a meaningful transaction processing method that becomes as widely accepted as Discover Card or PayPal someday. It gets led in the developing world, and at some point it comes back to the US.
And if this happens, this is going to radically transform the way that people think about, use money, send money. And, you know, Goldman Sachs put out a research report a couple weeks ago.
I think we've had
Into
an
the-
outage here.
It's,
We
it
lost
went
the
out,
mic
yeah.
there.
Okay. Goldman Sachs put out a research report a couple weeks ago that estimated that annually Bitcoin could save the system $210 billion. And I don't know what they assume for market share, but you know, we're talking about really big numbers here, which is why when people think about, you know, Bitcoin as an investment thesis, you can invest in the companies, which will probably adapt to whatever the digital currency, ultimately the one that wins. I think it'll be Bitcoin. Or you can invest in Bitcoin itself, which I kind of think is like a bet on the entire industry, bet on the technology. And right now, there's about $7 billion of Bitcoin out there. So if you invest in a technology that's going to save the world $200 billion a year, you can do the math on the upside.
Barry,
And then the second opportunity that's also being led by the developing world is Bitcoin as a store of value. And so Bitcoin is highly volatile, as everybody knows, and so it's a crappy store of value relative to the US dollar. But relative to, you know, the Argentinian peso, which is, you know, experiencing very steep inflation, something that has volatility in both directions is actually better than something that has volatility only in one direction, right? So if you're in Venezuela right now and you're worried about, you know, and you're worried about like just civil disorder and collapse, and you're thinking about what impact that's going to have on your fiat currency, well, that makes Bitcoin much more appealing relative to, you know, your local alternative. Or the same thing in the Ukraine, in Cyprus, when you saw the bank collapses a year ago, you know, you saw exactly that behavior happening, where people lost faith in the, you know, in the banks and in the fiat in that country. And it will happen on a country by country basis because these things don't happen, you know, globally. It's every single person is making a local decision about, would I rather hold Bitcoin or my local alternative? And because we live here in America, where we actually have quite a lot of faith in the US dollar and faith in its stability and faith in the Fed, we can't necessarily put ourselves in the mindset of somebody who has to make that decision under very different circumstances. So then you ask yourself, is there a 1% chance that over the next 15 years there will be 5 to 10 countries that undergo either hyperinflation or some sort of civil disorder that leads to the collapse of the governments and currencies? Is there one, and that could cause the people in those countries to turn to an alternative currency?
Could I
Do you
jump in,
believe
please?
in math or the government, right? Do you have more trust in math or a government? That's really.
Let me
the
cut
summary
in,
of
and
what
I
Jeremy's talking
apologize for that, but I wanted to, we don't have a great deal of time left, and I wanted to steer in a different direction for a while. And I'm going to go to Barry first. Barry, you've You may be the most prolific Bitcoin investor. You've had 20 company investments so far,
25.
maybe more.
25.
25, sorry. You have an investment trust investing in Bitcoin itself. You've announced plans to spin out some of your desk operations. Where do you see the empire going? What would you like to accomplish?
Well, I joke internally I want to build the Standard Oil of digital currency in the good years. Well, look, I mean, like my strategy has always been invest in the best entrepreneurs who have big ideas. And with Second Market, well, we've been very successful in making less liquid, less accessible asset classes more accessible to the masses. So really, our efforts are all about creating awareness and education and accessibility to this investment class. And so, there's not some grand scheme to take over the world other than, invest in great ideas, big ideas that are going to change the world, and then make it possible for other people to invest in those ideas too.
Now, Margot, you're raising a fund, right? And you, I think of your fund as allowing less accredited investors to become involved, 50 grand, $100,000.
No, they have to be accredited investors.
Accredited, but still democratizing a little bit, not million-dollar investments. So, and I understand you want to use, you're investing not just in the currency, but you want to do some company investments too. So what appetite are you seeing for your fundraising activities? How's it going?
Well, there's definitely a lot of people interested in getting into digital currency without actually holding it, which you can see with Barry's fund. But we're going to be actively trading 70%, and it's not just going to be with Bitcoin, but with other altcoins out there. Because there definitely is a way to make money with other altcoins too and actively trade them. And then the other 30% investing in cryptocurrency companies that are going to help with structure. I mentioned a couple of them, the social KYC, which is something that could really benefit a lot of the Bitcoin companies because you really need to know who people are. Even though regulation isn't black and white yet, there's still, most of the Bitcoin companies are actively trying to follow the rules that will eventually be set and know who people are. So companies basically.
How far are you through the fundraising process?
Well, we definitely have money that wants to come in. So I was just in Cyprus last week, meeting with the Central Bank of Cyprus. So it's still early, but it was really interesting meeting with the Central Bank of Cyprus. Definitely wouldn't have them as our custodial bank or in Cyprus. And they were very upfront about that. But they're kind of hungry to set an example of how you can be innovative and give people the tools to be regulated and also benefit from that. So it's really exciting to see how enthusiastic they were and also participate in the EU regulated opposed to being in America and hoping that happens.
We are short on time, but we have a question from the audience. Would you like to ask?
Yeah, so there's the theory Barry has saying Bitcoin is an overall bet on the entire economy. The panel agrees it's all about the protocol in there, but if Ethereum or Mastercoin, all these other things come in, that is not necessarily, it's based on the Bitcoin protocol, but it doesn't help Bitcoin itself. What are your thoughts outside, if you're not speaking your own book saying, well, my fund or my fund or my fund. How do you see the field playing out for logical investment philosophy in alternatives as a threat? So equities have been fragmented in 1,000 markets. No one made money investing in 100 car companies and they all went out of business. What is your thought of the threat of Bitcoin from the newer and better thing of the next protocol?
Who do you want to answer?
You.
Okay, so I think that there's a lot of network effect around Bitcoin itself. By now, I think the cumulative market cap of all the altcoins is order of magnitude, maybe a fifth the size of Bitcoin. So that gives you some sense as to kind of scale here. As with anything else, you want to hold what you think other people hold valuable, and so that carries a lot of weight. I think that the thing that could disrupt Bitcoin from its leadership position would be some massive loss of trust. And I think if that happens, that it will have knock-on effects for all other, people won't say, oh, well, Bitcoin didn't work, but this new thing is going to be totally awesome. I mean, that's not going to happen. People are going to lose trust in all digital currencies for a decade or more, and then maybe we'll see another resurgence. But if it's not Bitcoin, it's nothing.
I know we're really short on time. Is there a question in the back?
Yeah, so guys, what about the IRS ruling yesterday on it being a property versus currency?
Good, good.
Look, on the range of possibilities of it not being taxable, which was never going to happen, to paying taxes at an ordinary income rate, the fact that they ended up at property, which gives you the opportunity to pay taxes at a long-term capital gains tax rate, I think it's probably the best of all outcomes. It does create a record-keeping burden, which I can promise you right now is being addressed by all of the wallet companies and the merchant processors. So for people who have spent and used their Bitcoin in the past, it's going to be a pain in the ass for us, quite frankly, over the next few weeks. But by 2014 tax year, April 15th of 15, this will all be automated, in my opinion. Or at least you'll have the ability to use automated services to make it much easier.
Yeah, I'd agree.
Well, I apologize. We are out of time. We could spend another half an hour, another hour on this topic. I wish we could. Please join me in thanking the gang here today.
That's for this.